So, you know, I was able to get him to give me a little bit of leeway with a little bit of recognizable percussion or something like that, but virtually everything else was built from the ground up. So I had 3 sound designers just creating palettes of samples for me so that I could start composing using these sounds that no one else in the world had. And that has a lot to do with the lushness and the uniqueness of the Ecco soundtrack. Do you have a copy of that, the full-blown CD version of that?
Not the full-blown CD version.
I'll send you a double album. We actually released that as an album, and it's Ecco 1 and 2. It's called Ecco Songs of Time, and it's a nice record.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a little bit of a perspective, my first year of college, in fact, one of the first days, I heard a really soothing synthesizer coming from the next room in my dorm, and I thought, what is that? And I went next door and found these guys playing Ecco, the first level with those sweeping filter chords. And really nothing has been done like that before or since. And a lot of innovation was going on between you and David Havalosa and Mark Miller. What was it like working for those guys?
Yeah, David was on the team with me. As a matter of fact, he was kind of heading up, you know, the sound side of things, and he had a deep knowledge of game systems, and, you know, he was a gamer. That was the one thing that made it a little difficult for me at first, was I was not from that culture. And it's amazing, and I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously, it's amazing what a culture that is. And even then, if you didn't play games at every possible opportunity, you were an outsider. And so to some degree, I was an outsider. And I think it was because of my personality and my love for music that I was able to win most of these people over. But it's also why they interviewed me for months before hiring me. And what got me hired were my chops and the sound of my records, my recordings. You know, they were saying, we really need this level of expertise and quality in our full bandwidth Red Book audio tracks, but this guy has no game experience. And it kept coming back to that, especially David. He was a real, you know, I had to kind of win over him, you know, to be able to, you know, be accepted into that fold. And I don't blame them. I mean, it's a very, you know, sophisticated and unique place and way to work. So yeah, I worked with Mark. Mark was always a contractor. He would come in independently on things, he and his brother, but David was actually in the multimedia studio at Sega with me for the first 2 years, I think, and then he moved on, and I kind of took over and you know, started to really turn it into more of a music house, you know, with a label and, you know, very sophisticated studios and equipment and a lot of live players and session players and vocalists, you know, and just kind of took it up to the next level.
You also worked on Jurassic Park. Were there any issues using music from the original film soundtrack or getting approval from, say, John Williams, Michael Crichton, or Steven Spielberg?
Not that that really got down to me. At that point, I had a pretty good creative freedom with what I was doing. We hadn't licensed any of the music, so there was no pressure for us to try to, you know, emulate John Williams by any stretch of the imagination. The coolest part about that project, quite honestly, was the fact that we had the same paleontologist living in our multimedia studio that had lived with Spielberg while he was making the movie. And this guy, I can't remember his name. I was trying to think of it when I saw your question. But this guy was a wild man, straight out of Wyoming, you know, where he had been making all these massive discoveries of dinosaurs for the last 30 years or whatever. Just a crazy guy with a big dirty beard and a ratty old cowboy hat. And he was truly, you know, a unique character. And he was our style guide, basically, from a visual standpoint. You have to understand, in the multimedia studio at that time, we were all thrown in the same space together. So sound designers were right next to, you know, artists and colorists and people doing the programming were, you know, on that side of the building. And, you know, we were all kind of over each other's shoulder. So and I'm a very big fan of the visual side of games and movies and things like that. So I would always be watching what they were doing, and he would just take them down into the weeds on why this had to be a certain way, and this is not how that animal would walk or react. And So from, we had a lot of technical constraints on that game because it was one of the first that was using a lot of Z-axis movement, kind of the early 3D animation, and also some video. It was a license, so we had to match the visitor center and all this other stuff, and so we were also getting his feedback on the sounds of the dinosaurs. And musically, more on that project than any that had come before it, I was really almost operating as an executive producer. I wrote the main theme of it, and then I oversaw a lot of the production of the sound design and the other music. I believe that Brian Coburn had written a lot of that music, and he and I were good friends and worked well together. And he kind of came from a different background. He was more of an electronic music, kind of a grunge creator. He liked a lot of real granular sounds and was very into the synthesis of that. And I was more of a, I took more of a classical approach and a pop approach. So the combination of the two was always fun to see what we'd come up with. But that was one of those projects that I would, I oversaw from a high level on a lot of it, and then got my hands dirty in the writing of the main opening themes and stuff like that. So it was a great experience. We spent a lot of time on that game, and thank God the film was a hit. I mean, we had worked on licenses before that where you'd work for a year because the movie hadn't even come out, and you're trying to get a relatively parallel release, and all of a sudden the film comes out and flops and is gone, and you still haven't released the game yet. So now you've got this friggin' stone around your neck, knowing that the film came out and was a joke, and now you've got a $2 million licensed game that you've got to release. I think we even pulled the plug on Cool World, which was I think Brad Pitt's first film, or one of his first films, and he was sharing the screen with animated characters in that movie, and we had licensed the game for that, the game rights, and the movie completely flopped. And I don't know that we ever even released the game, to be honest. I don't know that we ever actually came out with that game. So you're always kind of walking the line with regard to licenses. I'm not a big fan of them, to be honest.
Well, yeah, that's always a huge risk, and that's something that, as I'm sure you've seen, the publishers are taking a lot more, or they're reining in, exactly what it is that they pick.
Yeah, they don't. The thing that was never discussed then, that's the top priority now, is avoiding overexposure. And back then it was just expose the shit out of it, excuse my French, just get it out there in every way, shape, or form, and something will hit and pay for everything else, So,
right, yeah, and I mean, one of the biggest challenges in video game history is getting a film game that can stand on its own in terms of something that's playable and enjoyable. As opposed to, oh, wow, I've seen the movie, so the game must be good. If you're a hardcore player, chances are you look at a film version of the game and go, yeah, it's probably going to suck.
Yeah, it's like the book and the movie thing, your mind's, the film that plays in your mind when you're reading a book is flawless, to be honest.
Right.
There are no cheesy effects in your brain, so it's really hard to do it better on the screen, and I think that games is the same kind of thing. You have a predetermined expectation, and if it falls even slightly short of that, the disappointment is huge, especially if you're dropping $40-50 on the game. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, because you're supposed to be able to get a lot more in the way of hours of enjoyment, but if you don't enjoy the first 5 minutes, well,
yeah, if the character isn't how you picture them, or doesn't do the character on the film justice, or whatever, I think you're right. Or so the scenarios are usually a lot lighter because you're doing more with them, and you're not digging into the psyche of the character as much as you are just the action around it. So yeah, we talk about that for hours, huh?